Good morning, everyone. In the last class, we went through an analysis or we went through a description about the writer Charles Lamb or the essayist Charles Lamb, right? And we understood how he is known as the king of essays, or he was a great essayist, um, an English essayist. And the particular essay that has been prescribed for you is titled Dream Children, a Reverie, right? And this is a very interesting essay. It's a kind of narrative, a narrative kind of essay. And this particular essay deals with many themes. We will discuss what these themes are. And this is basically, we can say, a narrative essay and also an autobiographical essay. So when we look at this essay, I hope the essay is open before you. You have your textbooks. You can open that to page 23. So in this particular essay, we see how Lamb gives the opening line. He says, children love to listen to stories about their elders when they were children. So he opens the essay by narrating the story of his grandmother, Mrs. Field, to his children, Alice and John, right? So Lamb's grandmother, or his children's great grandmother, lived in a great house in Norfolk. That's what he says. You know, when you read the essay, it's like that. To stretch their imagination to the conception of a traditionary great uncle or grand dame whom they never saw. It was in this spirit that my little ones crept about me the other evening to hear about their great grandmother Field, who lived in a great house in Norfolk, 100 times bigger than that in which they and their papa lived, which had been the scene, so at least it was generally believed in that part of the country, of the tragic incidents which they had lately become familiar with from the ballad of the children in the wood. So he speaks about his grandmother's house, or the children's great grandmother, and he tells his children, or he narrates to his children, the story of the tragic scene that had been carved out in wood upon the chimney piece of the great hall in that great house. So this wooden chimney was later replaced by a marble chimney by the owner, right? Certain it is that the whole story of the children and their cruel uncle was to be seen fairly carved out in wood upon the chimney piece of the great hall, the whole story down to the robin redbreast, till a foolish rich person pulled it down to set up a marble one of modern invention in its stead, with no story upon it. So, you know, there was this famous ballad or the legend of the innocent children and their tragic end in the woods. So, this particular story is was carved out of the chimney piece of the great hall in the great house of Lamb's grandmother. So, the story about the children in the wood, it is about a gentleman who wrote a will before he died, and on his deathbed, he committed the keeping of his two children, that is, his daughter and his son, to his own brother. So he told his brother that you have to take care of my children. But this brother was a very wicked man, and he did not want the children to be there on the scene because he wanted to possess all of his brother's property. So what he did was that he decided that he would kill the children, right? And he decides to send the children to the forest to be killed, but they are rescued by the robin redbreast, or the two birds there, right? And this murder is like, so what happens is, the uncle story, or how the uncle tried to destroy this or kill the children to get his brother's property, was something that was depicted on the wooden chimney of this house where Lamb's grandmother lived. But later on, he says how this wooden chimney was replaced by a marble chimney by the owner, right? So the great chimney piece was replaced by a marble chimney. That's what he says here. The foolish rich person who bought this house from Grandmother Field uh, pulled it down to set up a marble one of modern invention in its stead with no story upon it. Right? So the what happened was Mrs. Field sold this house to someone else, and it was that man who actually built or pulled down this wooden chimney and put a marble chimney, sorry, pull down this wooden chimney and put a marble chimney instead of that. So, what happens is we realize that later on, as we read the lesson, we understand that it was not her own house. Mrs. Field, that is Lamb's grandmother, was not the real owner of the house. Right? In the beginning, we get an impression that she sold this house to this man who replaced this wooden chimney with a marble chimney. But in actuality, as we read, we understand that Mrs. Field was not the real owner of the house, but because of her very kind and humble disposition and her great religious devotion, everybody respected her. And the owner of this house had actually hired her as the caretaker and had handed this house over to her while he himself lived in another house. So Mrs. Field lived in this great house as if it was her own house. Right? But later on, what happens is this great ornaments or these beautiful ornaments or the precious ornaments of this great house were shifted to the real owner's house, but they did not suit the modern house of the real owner, right? And furthermore, Lamb goes on to tell his children about his grandmother's death and the funeral that was attended by a large number of people, both poor and rich. Even people from many miles around had come to express their condolences and respect towards her. Because Mrs. Field was a very humble and very pious woman who knew the Psalms, the entire Psalms by heart, and a great part of the Testament. So she knew everything. So we'll just read that, we'll understand what he says. Here Alice put out one of her dear mother's looks, too tender to be called upbraiding. Then I went on to say how religious and how good their great grandmother Field was, how beloved and respected by everybody, though she was not indeed the mistress of this great house, but had only the charge of it, and yet in some respect she might be said to be the mistress of it too. It was committed to her by the owner, who preferred living in a newer and more fashionable mansion which he had purchased somewhere in the adjoining county. But still, she lived in it in such a manner as if it had been her own, and kept up the dignity of the great house in a sort while she lived, which afterwards came to decay and was nearly pulled down, and all its old ornaments stripped and carried away to the owner's other house, where they were set up, and looked as awkward as if someone were to carry away the old tombs they had lately seen at the Abbey and stick them up at Lady C's tawdry gilt drawing room. So what he means to say here is, when this old house started getting, dilapidated, the owner decided to pull it down. Mrs. Field treated the house like her own house. So when the owner decided to pull down the house, all the great ornaments or the precious ornaments or all the decorations in that house were shifted to the real owner's house. But it did not fit in there. It was like, putting old things in a new house. It did not match, right? It did not match. Here, John smiled as much to say that would be foolish indeed. And then I told how, when she came to die, her funeral was attended by a concourse of all the poor and some of the gentry too of the neighborhood for many miles around, to show their respect for her memory, because she had been such a good and religious woman. So good indeed that she knew all the psaltery by heart. That's a psalm. And I, a great part of the Testament beside. So, like Lamb says, his grandmother was such a pious woman that when she died, her funeral was attended by a large number of people, both rich and poor. And people came from all across the countryside, from many miles, because they wanted to pay their respects to this devoted lady. She was a very humble woman, a very pious woman. She knew the Psalms and great part of the Bible by heart, right? Then I told what a tall, upright, graceful person their great-grandmother Field once was, and how in her youth she was esteemed the best dancer. Here Alice Alice's little right foot played an involuntary movement, till upon my looking grave it desisted. The best dancer, I was saying, in the country, till a cruel disease called cancer came and bowed her down with pain. See, Lamb then tells his children, Alice and John, about their grandmother's youth. She was a very tall, very upright woman with a graceful personality. She was the best dancer in the country until what happened? Cancer attacked her and deprived her of her skill. But it could never bend her good spirits or make them stoop. But they were still upright because she was so good and religious. Even when cancer came and attacked her body, the disease could not take away her good spirits. She was such a nice woman, a very good-hearted woman. So her spirits could never be destroyed. Her body had to actually give in to the disease, but her spirits did not give in. Her mind did not give in. Then I told how she was used to sleep by herself in a lone chamber of the great lone house, and how she believed that an apparition of two infants was to be seen at midnight gliding up and down the great staircase near where she slept. But she said those innocents would do her no harm, and how frightened I used to be, though in those days I had my maid to sleep with me, because I was never half so good or religious as she, and yet I never saw the infants. Right? So Lamb tells Alice and John how his grandmother used to sleep alone in an isolated chamber of the house, and how she believed that she saw two infant ghosts in the midnight. However, she was also sure that these were decent mortals who would not harm her. Right? And Lamb says that though his maid slept with him, he slept with his maid in the sense that he was not sleeping alone. He was quite frightened of the ghosts, but because he was not as religious as his grandmother. But unfortunately or fortunately, he says, I've never seen the ghost. Maybe because I was not as religious as my grandmother, I have never seen the infant ghost. So who would the infant ghosts be? They would be the ghosts of those two little children who had been murdered by their uncle, right? The uncle had taken them to the forest, and though the robin redbreast or the birds tried to rescue them, they couldn't. They were killed by the uncle. Right, and the ghosts of these two young children kept on going around in the house because it actually belonged to them, but they were not able to possess it. They were killed, right? But the murder was found out and the uncle was punished. That is what happens in this story towards the end. Here, John expanded all his eyebrows and tried to look courageous. So you see, John and Alice, they're so involved in the story that every time Charles Lamb tells them something about the grandmother, about her dancing skill, or about the ghost, they are both so involved that they involuntarily, through their body language, they become part of it. Alice moving her foot, John looking scared, etc. Right? Here, John expanded all his eyebrows and tried to look courageous. Then I told how good she was to all her grandchildren, having us to the great house in the holidays, when I in particular used to spend many hours by myself in gazing upon the old busts of the 12 Caesars that had been emperors of Rome, till the old marble heads would seem to live again, or I to be turned into marble with them. How I could never be tired with roaming about that huge mansion with its vast empty rooms, with their worn-out hangings, fluttering tapestry, and carved oaken panels, with the gilding almost rubbed out, sometimes in the spacious old-fashioned gardens which I had almost to myself, unless when now and then a solitary gardening man would cross me, and how the nectarines and peaches hung upon the walls, without my ever offering to pluck them, because they were forbidden fruit, unless now and then, and because I had more pleasure in strolling about the old melancholy-looking yew trees of the firs, and picking up the red berries and the fir apples, which were good for nothing but to look at, or in lying about the fresh grass, with all the fine garden smells around me, or basking in the orangery till I could almost fancy myself ripening too along with the oranges and the limes in that grateful warmth, or in watching the days that darted to and fro in the fish pond at the bottom of the garden, with here and there a great sulky pike hanging midway down the water in silent state, as if it mocked at their impertinent friskings. I had more pleasure in these busy, idle diversions than in all the sweet flavors of peaches, nectarines, oranges, and such like common baits of children. Here we see how Lamb tells Alice and John about their great grandmother's love and affection towards her grandchildren. Lamb, along with his siblings and cousins, his brother James Elia, his that is John, right? John Elia, the pen name James Elia, and his sister Mary Bridget or Mary Lamb, right? They used to visit their grandmother in the holidays, and especially he, used to spend most of his hours gazing around the old sculptures of the emperors of Rome. It was a huge house. So even the busts of Caesar, bust is the head up to the chest, right, of the 12 emperors, the 12 Caesars of Rome, right? He used to spend hours gazing on the old sculptures of the emperors of Rome. He would gaze on them as much as the sculptors would appear to him living, or else he would turn marble. And he would also roam around in the mansion without getting tired. He loved to be alone while roaming around in the empty rooms, looking at the worn out tapestry. And then, sometimes this old gardener would cross him. He would roam across the gardens. He would scrutinize the vegetation and the flowers. He was very much happy in spending his holidays like this. And he preferred spending time alone roaming around than the usual habits of children and the sweet aromas of peaches and oranges and limes and nectarines, right? So he said, I used to love doing all that, watching the fish in the fish pond, right? Going around in the orchards, looking at all the trees. He preferred that very much. So he says, I had more pleasure in these busy, idle diversions. The word busy, idle is an oxymoron. It is a combination of two opposite ideas, busy and idle. So two opposite ideas are yoked together. So the figure of speech used there is oxymoron. So he says, I had more pleasure in these busy, idle diversions. Why does he call it busy, idle diversions? For him, he was busy, walking around, looking at this. So here he felt he was busy doing all that. But actually, in actuality, they were all idle diversions. He was not doing any work. He was simply walking around, simply roaming around, simply gazing at all these sculptures, looking at the fish, watching the fruit, roaming around the garden, scrutinizing the vegetation. So that was, according to someone else, it was just an idle pastime. It was an idle pastime. But for him, it was something which involved so much of his life, so it was kind of busy for him. That is why he calls it busy, idle diversions. So he says, I had more pleasure in these busy, idle diversions than in all the sweet flavors of peaches, nectarines, oranges, and such like common baits of children. Here John slyly deposited back upon the plate a bunch of grapes, which, not unobserved by Alice, he had mediated, dividing with her, and both seemed willing to relinquish them for the present as irrelevant. See how they are involved in the story. When the father tells them that he preferred wandering around than eating peaches and nectarines and oranges, John immediately keeps back the bunch of grapes that he had tried to pull out from the plate and divide between himself and Alice. So they're so involved in the story. Then, in somewhat a more heightened tone, I told how, though their great grandmother loved all her grandchildren, yet in a special manner she might be said to love their uncle, John, two dashes, it's John Lamb, because he was so handsome and spirited a youth and a king to the rest of us. And instead of moping in solitary corners like some of us, he would mount the most mettlesome horse he could get, when but an imp no bigger than themselves, and make it carry him half over the county in a morning, and join the hunters when there were any out. And yet he loved the old great house and gardens too, but had too much spirit to be always pent up within the boundaries. And how their uncle grew up to man's estate as brave as he was handsome, to the admiration of everybody, but of their great grandmother field most especially, and how he used to carry me upon his back when I was a lame footed boy, for he was a good bit older than me, many a mile when I could not walk for pain, and how in afterlife he became lame footed too, and I did not always, I fear, make allowances enough for him when he was impatient and in pain, nor remember sufficiently how considerate he had been to me when I was lame footed. Right now, Lamb tells his children, Alice and John, about their uncle John Lamb. See, Lamb's grandmother loved all her grandchildren, but she had a special corner or a special affection for John. John was a very brave, handsome, and spirited man. He had a very unique sort of personality. He would never sit in corners like Charles Lamb would do. He used to mount horses, tour around the villages, he would merge with the hunters. With the passage of time, being brave, he earned the respect and admiration of everyone in the family and out of the family as well. Everybody admired him. John was a few years older than Charles Lamb, right? And John would carry Charles Lamb, who was lame footed, on his back for many miles when Charles Lamb was unable to walk. But later on, what happened is John became lame footed, right? And Charles Lamb, he's so sorry that he had not been so sympathetic enough to endure the intolerant discomforts that John had faced when he became lame, right? And he even forgot that John had carried him or supported him when he was lame footed in his youth or when he was young. And how when he died, though he had not been dead an hour, it seemed as if he had died a great while ago. Such a distance there is betwixt life and death. And how I bore his death, as I thought pretty well at first, but afterwards it haunted me. And though I did not cry or take it to heart that some do, and as I think he would have done if I had died, yet I missed him all day long, and knew not till then how much I had loved him. I missed his kindness, I missed his crossness, and wished him to be alive again, to be quarreling with him, for we quarrel sometimes, rather than not have him again, and was as uneasy without him as he, their poor uncle, must have been when the doctor took off his limb. Right? So, Charles Lamb, he says, he was so unhappy, or he dreads the fact that he had not been sympathetic to his brother. Right? When John passed away, Charles Lamb missed him so much. He has reminiscences about the gentleness, about the pettiness, and he really desires that his brother was alive again. He wanted him alive again so that he could fight with him again, or quarrel with him. Because Lamb says, he felt so uneasy without his brother, just like John would have felt when the doctor amputated his limb. When he was sick, he had this problem in his foot, and the doctor had to amputate his limb. And how John would have felt uneasy without a limb, Charles Lamb says he felt the same. He had the same feeling. He felt the same way. He felt so uneasy without John in his life. Here the children fell a crying and asked if the little mourning which they had on was not for Uncle John, and they looked up and prayed me not to go on about their uncle, but to tell them some stories about their pretty dead mother. So the children at this point, they start mourning for their dead uncle, and they request Lamb to proceed by narrating something about their dead mother. They don't want to hear anything more about their uncle because it kind of cuts them up. They feel very sad about it. Then I told how for 7 long years, and in hope sometimes in despair, yet persisting ever, I had courted the fair Alice, right? So he speaks about Alice, the woman whom he had courted. And as much as the children could understand, I explained to them what coyness and difficulty and denial meant in maidens, when suddenly turning to Alice, the soul of the first Alice looked out of her eyes with such a reality of representment that I became in doubt which of them stood there before me, or whose that bright hair was. And while I stood gazing, both the children gradually grew fainter to my view, receding and still receding, till nothing at last but two mournful features were seen in the uttermost distance, which without speech strangely impressed upon me the effects of speech. We are not of Alice, nor of thee, nor are we children at all. The children of Alice called Bartram father, we are nothing, less than nothing in dreams. We are only what might have been, and must wait upon the tedious shores of Lethe millions of ages before we have existence and a name. And immediately awakening, I found myself quietly seated by my bachelor in my bachelor armchair where I had fallen asleep, with the faithful Bridget unchanged by my side, but John Lamb or James Elia was gone forever. Right? So when the children ask Charles Lamb to tell them something about their dead mother, he starts narrating narrating about Alice Winterton, right? So this he tells them about the 7 long years where he had uncomplainingly dated and courted the beautiful Alice Winterton, right? So when Lamb was narrating his experiences with his wife Alice, I put it in quotes, he suddenly realized that the old Alice was communicating with him through the eyes of the little Alice sitting in front of him. And as he struggled to stare, it appeared that his children, John and Alice, were disappearing from him. Finally, the two desolate structures are left out of them, and they're not there, the children are not there, they're just two desolate structures left. And they tell him that they are neither of Alice nor of him, because they're not the children of Alice Winterton and Charles Lamb. Right? They are not children at all. They are just figments of his imagination. The children of Alice called Bartram father, that means Alice Winterton, did not marry Charles Lamb. She was his lost lady love. She had married a man called Bartram, and they had children. Now, this was Lamb's imagination. So they were just merely dreams. And it is then, that suddenly Charles Lamb wakes up and finds himself in an armchair where he had fallen asleep, and who is by his side? His sister, Bridget, is by his side. So this particular essay, it is a narrative essay in which Charles Lamb narrates the story of his dream that he had. And it is in this dream that he came across his dream children who vanish at the end of the dream. So this particular essay exhibits or tells us the subjects of pain, the subject of guilt, of getting deprived of people whom we love from the core of our heart. So it is in this essay that Charles Lamb he brings about a dream world to tell us the sweet recollections of the past days. So there is an element of despair that is woven into this essay, but it is this element of despair that clarifies the worth and necessity of childhood and the loved ones for an individual. Because without loved ones, life appears very dark and suffocating for any individual. And that is what happens to Charles Lamb also. So the reaction and the response of the children in the essay reflect the effect of the story on their mind. It makes that essay so dramatic. As I was telling you, their actions, they were so involved. Their actions were the proof that the story has been, that the story that has been narrated to them has a great influence on them. And they were moved by their father's description. But we see, there's a shift of tone in the essay at different points. There is the shift in tone from humorous to tragic, and that occurs when the author describes the scene of his grandmother, his beloved brother's death, right? Lamb appears to be very nostalgic throughout the essay. He is longing for his loved ones. He is depressed by like Alice Winterton is dead. Now she did not marry him, she's dead. So he's depressed by the death of his beloved Alice, and he feels so guilty for not marrying her, right? So there is a twist at the end of the essay, when all the events of the story turn out to be a dream. That is what adds suspense, because till then we don't understand or we don't realize that these children were not real. It's only towards the end that this twist comes. We can call it the O. Henry kind of twist, right? If you read the stories of O. Henry, you'll understand that there's always a twist at the end of the story, right? So if you read, there are many short stories, The Last Leaf, I think The Gift of the Magi, all these, they have this twist at the end which adds suspense. And similarly, here also, we see a twist at the end of the essay wherein we realize that all the events that he had been describing were just a dream. The children were not real, right? But in this essay, we come to know something about Lamb's childhood days, about his grandmother. So Lamb tells us about his dead relatives. He tells us about his past days of childhood, right? It is his daydream, and in his daydream, he has his children. It's his imagination. He wishes things were like that. So he's speaking to John and Alice in his daydream. So he tells them in detail about his maternal grandmother, Mrs. Field, right? He also reports that his grandmother was a religious and a very kind-hearted person, the best dancer in her youth, and how this disease called cancer had broken her body but could not break her spirits. Besides, she was also the housekeeper of a rich person's mansion in Norfolk, right? He tells about his holiday time in that house and its garden. He says that he used to spend time in its old-fashioned chambers alone. And he also tells us how he loved to gaze upon the busts of the 12 Caesars, how he loved to roam around in the large garden, in the orchards, lie on the grass, right? He also narrates to us the death of his grandmother owing to cancer. He also tells us how her funeral was attended by so many people, right? He tells us that it's because she was kind to everybody. That was the reason why so many people attended her funeral from across so many miles. So we get to have an idea. That's why I said it was autobiographical. It is autobiographical. It's narrative. So we get to have an idea about his grandmother, about his childhood days. We also get details about John Lamb or his brother, James Elia. He tells us about his elder brother, right? He narrates the physical beauty of his elder brother, the outdoor activities which his elder brother loved, right? So he tells us about how his brother used to carry him on his back when he was a lame-footed boy during his youth. And he also tells us, or tells us means he tells his children and he tells the reader that John Lamb was the most favorite grandchild of Mrs. Field because he was a very handsome young boy and he was a very high-spirited person, right? And he also tells the children and also the reader about the painful period of John Lamb as a lame person due to because his leg had to be, one of his limbs had to be amputated, right? And he tells us how the doctor took off the limb of his elder brother during the surgery. And he also tells how he regrets that he did not take care of his brother the way his brother took care of him. That actually haunts him. He says he did not mourn so much for his brother after his death, but he loved his brother and he missed his brother so much. It was, as though you're missing one part of you. That is what happened to him. We also understand about Alice Winterton, right? See, he reports, he tells his children about the dead mother, about their dead mother, right? About on their request. He says, he had spent almost 7 long years courting her, and she was just like any other woman, so coquettish, so shy, kept on kind of neglecting, denying him, and he wanted to marry her. He says how it was very tough to have acceptance for his marriage proposal from Alice Winterton or their mother, right? And then, we see how Lamb notices that the eyes of the little Alice sitting right in front of him looked like old Alice Winterton's eyes. And then, we see how the images of the children start growing very, very faint, right? Then only 2 mournful segments are there in front of the author's eyes. There are no children. So these elements make us understand that this was just a figment of his imagination. They're nothing but creations of his dream. Because we realize how he opens his eyes and finds himself seated in his chair. He's a bachelor's chair, and who is with him? It's not Alice Winterton, nor does he have any children. He always dreamed. That was his longing. but it never worked out. So we see him sitting next to his sister. The sister who had this psychiatric problem or this mental issue, he took care of her. So it was Bridget or Mary Lamb who was sitting next to him. There was no Alice. Alice Winterton had never married him. She had married a person called Bartram, right? But she died. And Lamb wishes that things were not like that. Things had been different. So we realize that this is just a figment of his imagination, a figment that he is trying to create, right? So this is what this particular essay is all about. We'll continue the discussion of this essay in the next class. I've got a few more things with relation to themes and all to be discussed. So this is basically basically the essay. I've just given you an analysis of the essay, and I've just read through the essay, and I've tried to give an analysis of what it is. So what I want you to do is, I want you to go back, read the essay at home tonight, and when we come tomorrow for class, I'll just give you a brief overview of the themes and some of the important aspects of what this essay is all about. And then we can, if you have any doubts with regard to that, with regard to any aspect, you can ask me. Okay. So thank you for now. Any questions?